Hi everybody, how's it going? Welcome back. I hope you're having a good day. Are you ready for the next exercise? So let's get started. In this exercise, the goal is to get familiar with three basic forms. We will learn about spheres, cylinders, and cuboids. Follow along with me to get a feel for the basics of these three basic forms. Sometimes I may be going too fast, so remember to pause the video regularly. Last exercise, we identifying which basic shapes and drawing the basic shapes that are in a reference image, and we used it to create rough lines, and we used those rough lines to create some finished lines. This is the result we got, which is fine, but if you look at it, it looks a little flat. It does not look like a three-dimensional object. So that's what we're going to start looking at in the next exercise. The first step is to get familiar with the basic forms like the sphere and the cylinder and the cuboid. So if you look at this picture, we have things which approximate a basic sphere. So for example, this lady's head, it's quite close to a basic sphere. If you look at these, the upper and the lower arm, these look like basic cylinders as well as the leg. So without further ado, let's get started practicing. The first thing we're gonna practice is your basic sphere. Your basic sphere is just essentially a circle. Drawing circles is hard, as you know, but I'm gonna try. Probably whichever software you're using has this circle tool, but I like to practice drawing a circle freehand. It's very good practice. So here, good enough, right? Let me just correct this a little bit. And let me just, good enough. Okay, so here we have a circle. That's the sphere. Okay, good job. Bye-bye. No, just kidding. What's the difference between a circle and a sphere? A sphere has form, and that means it interacts with the lighting in the scene. That means it has highlights and shadows. So where are the highlights and shadows? The sphere. So let's say we have our light source over here. That's our light source. That means we have this part of the sphere which is catching the light most directly, and when it reflects off the sphere, it bounces directly into our eyes. So that means that's the brightest part of the sphere. That's what we call the highlight. Then we've got this hemisphere, this half of the sphere, that's catching the light directly, but because the surface of the sphere, those parts is facing away from us, a lot of that light is bouncing off not into our eyes, but like around the place. So that's quite bright, but not all of the light reaches our eyes, but it bounces off in another direction, so it's not as bright as this spot over here. And then we've got this part here, which is not catching any light directly. So in other words, it's in shadow. The only light it catches is the ambient light, which is light coming from all directions. But it's still much darker. We have essentially three regions: the highlighted region, the base region, and the shadow region. I'm gonna first pick the base color. Let's pick magenta. And I'm gonna fill it in. And then I'm gonna, let me add, you know what? Let me just add another layer below so that the fill doesn't mess with the line quality. So if I do it here, you see the fill kind of ruins this line, but if I do it on a layer below, it doesn't ruin it. Next, I'm gonna pick another brush, an airbrush. That's a very soft brush. It has very soft edges. And I'm gonna pick a highlighting color. So remember where I said the part most directly facing our eyes is going to catch the most light. And then we want to do our shading color too. So let's pick the base color, but darker. If I draw now on the edge, it's going to cover the edge and it's going to draw on the transparent part. But in Krita, I can easily fix it by locking the alpha. So whatever software you're using, figure out how to do it if you don't already know. Good thing about using a soft brush is that you got a small transition zone and it's easy to add that transition zone. So the good thing about this sphere is no matter what direction I draw it from, it's always going to look the same because it's symmetrical. But if I change the direction of the light, the shading pattern is going to be different. So, for example, if I draw another sphere but put the light source behind it, the shadow will be on this side. Put it in with an airbrush rather than a solid line. And there we go. So I want you to practice that for about 10 minutes. Okay everybody, I'm back. I hope you had a nice practice drawing your spheres. Next we're going to move on to the cylinder. The cylinder is quite similar and it's quite useful. For example, arms, very close to two cylinders combined. Fingers, obviously, just like cylinders. Even my head is quite long, so the front of my head similar to a cylinder. So if you can understand a cylinder, it will help you to be able to draw all sorts of basic forms. So let's get started. Cylinder is just an oval on the top and then like a rectangle. You'll recall that when we were drawing the cup, that was a cylinder, right? So that's your basic cylinder. Let's just correct it. And when it comes to lighting, we've got a flat surface on the top. So that's going to have a even shading color. And then we've got a curved surface. So it's going to have a variable shading color. So which color should I draw? Let's do it in orange. Why not? And I'm going to use, don't forget to switch off alpha lock. I'm going to use the fill color to add in the base. Now, let's say we have a light source over here. That means that this part is going to get this part is going to be the brightest because that part is at just the right angle to reflect a large proportion of the light hitting it straight into our eyes. I'm going to use the airbrush again. I'm going to pick a nice highlighting color. Oh, I forgot to switch on the... That's good enough, whatever. Let me just delete that part. Okay. Next, you've got this part which is facing away from, it doesn't catch the light directly. So it's going to be darker than the base color. And then of course you have a transition between them. And if you like, you can even make this part a bit darker too. Using a soft brush, it's quite easy to make this gradual gradation. Okay, so we can play around with moving this light source. But the other thing we can play around with is drawing it at different angles. So when I'm looking at this cylinder from straight above, it's just going to look like a circle. Right? But then if I rotate it just a little bit, this circle is going to become just a little bit of an oval. That's too much. And you're just going to see a little bit of the side, but it's quite short because mostly you're seeing it from the top. So you're only seeing a little bit of the side, it looks short. That's called foreshortening, by the way. But if I rotate it even more, now it's like at about 45 degrees. It becomes more of an oval and less of a circle, and you've got the sides becoming longer. And even more. Until finally you see it exactly from the side. And then you see its entire length, but you don't see the top or the bottom. So that's what I want you to spend about 10 minutes practicing. Draw the cylinder at various angles. Also, if you like, you can draw it at like a 45-degree angle like that. Maybe if I rotate it like that. So bear in mind, this is an approximation. This does not take into account perspective. But since we're beginners, we don't need to care about perspective for now. Okay, have fun drawing these cylinders. I'll see you in a bit when we're going to talk about these cuboids. Okay, welcome back. I hope you had fun drawing the cylinders. Next, we're going to have a look at your basic form, which is the cube. Many things are similar to a cube, like a house. Lots of things you might want in a book. Lots of things you might want to draw. Have your basic cube shape in it. So, let's start with basic cube. I'm going to start with a square. And I'm going to draw, give it a depth. It has a height, a width, and a depth. And depending on where the light shines, we got pretty flat surfaces, so coloring it is not so hard. Depending on where the light is coming from, if the light was coming from above and a little bit more on this side, so that the top catches most of the light, this side medium, and this side catches the least of the light. One light is going to be bright, one side is going to be bright, one side is going to be medium, and one side is going to be dark. So let's make it blue. Start with medium. Oh. Then let's move on to the highlight. And let's move on to the, oops. Shadow. So there you have your basic cube. This cube can rotate, right? So this is the tricky part when it comes to cube. By the way, you don't need to draw a cube if you don't want to. You could even draw like a rectangle. It's exactly the same, but the various angles, the various lengths of the various dimensions are different. This is like a tablet, like a stone tablet. Let's try to draw this cube from different angles. First of all, from the side, it's easy. It's just a square. Then, if you rotate that square, you have basically got two rectangles. And then if you rotate that, this is like 45 degrees. And if you rotate it even more, this would be the corner. and one rectangle would be a bit wider than the other. So this length is longer because I rotated it more than 45 degrees. And it's the same if you rotate it the other way. And now comes the tricky part. What if I rotate it more than one way? This is a bit of a mind bender. So it's quite tricky to imagine it, but I recommend you try it. We're gonna rotate it vertically and then horizontally, so it's gonna end up like this. No, that's not right. But after trying to draw a rotated cube from the imagination at least once, it's very useful to try to draw it from reference. So I just went to Google and I said cubes at various angles, and here we can just take one of these images, screenshot it, and use it as a reference image. Right. So that's it for the three basic forms: sphere, cylinder, and cuboid, where I recommend you spend at least 10 minutes per form getting a feel for the form. In all honesty, 10 minutes is not a lot. Shading forms is quite tricky, so it really wouldn't hurt to get a bit more practice than that. But you know, I promised you that you'd only have to set aside 30 minutes a day, so if you don't feel like doing more than 10 minutes per form, then don't. But if you don't mind doing a bit more, then practice it a little bit more tomorrow as well. So that's it from me for now. Tomorrow we are gonna get a bit of practice identifying basic forms in reference images and reproducing them at the proper location and with the proper proportions. So thanks a lot for watching. See you tomorrow.